The competitive Pokemon Iceberg continues. In part 1 we covered the first 4 layers, go check that out if you haven't already. Now we begin with Layer 5, and the first entry here is Level 85 Chansey. It's probably difficult to imagine any reason why you would want to be below level 100 in competitive Pokemon. Level 100 is the maximum level, and therefore you achieve the highest possible stats at level 100, so why would you want to be at lower level? We did mention the fear strategy in the last level, where being level 1 is advantageous for the lowest possible health value, but level 85 is a strange number. Why would you want to be level 85? Well, in Generation 1 OU, there is a mechanical quirk that you can exploit by being level 85. In Generation 1, if your health value is exactly 255 points less than your maximum HP, and you try to heal, it will not work. This is because the game is checking if your Pokemon is at full health or not, and if they are at full health, healing will not work because you can't heal any further. So it will bring back the "but it failed" message. However, because of Gen 1 and its absurd coding, when you are 255 health off your maximum health, it will also return the "but it failed" message. This is because when it's checking the HP values, it only checks the first byte of data, not the second byte. And because the first byte of data, when your health is at minus 255, corresponds with the same as your max HP, it thinks you're at full health and healing fails. But it's very unlikely for this mechanical quirk to come up in a battle, because to be on that precise health value is very rare. Damage is variable in Pokemon. You deal a damage range when you attack, not a set amount of damage. Except with the move Seismic Toss or Nightshade. These moves deal a set amount of damage. Seismic Toss deals an amount of damage equal to your level. Now if you are the usual level 100, you cannot bring your opponent to exactly 255 minus their max HP, because you deal too much damage with Seismic Toss. But if you're level 85, you can, because 85 times 3 is 255. So if you use Seismic Toss on a level 85 Pokemon 3 times against an enemy, now they are unable to heal ever again, unless you damage them more, or they take damage from some other source. If you keep them on that health value, by precisely hitting them with 3 Seismic Tosses at level 85, you will activate this glitch and make it so they can never heal. And that's through Softball or Rest or Recover or any form of healing. So that's why you might want to use level 85 Chansey to activate this glitch against an enemy. Up next is Reverse Speed Creep. In the previous video we talked about the concept of speed creep, when 2 Pokemon in a mirror match want to outrun the other, but they are faced with the dilemma of how much speed to invest. Because just 1 point of speed means you outrun them, but then what if they do the same? It creates a weird scenario where you invest more speed than you initially hoped to, just to outrun in the mirror match. Well, sometimes the opposite happens. Sometimes in a mirror matchup, you actually want to be slower. Often this is because slow pivoting is a powerful concept, and you want to be able to pivot out against the enemy second so that you have initiative. A common example of this is with Galarian Slowking. If 2 Galarian Slowkings are in on the field, and both of them select the move Chilly Reception, the slower Pokemon has an advantage, because the Pokemon that's faster uses Chilly Reception and switches out, and then the second Galarian Slowking uses Chilly Reception, and they have the advantage, because they can actually see what the opponent just did and respond accordingly, because they're moving last in the turn. So in this matchup, you want to reverse speed creep. You want to be as slow as possible. So Galarian Slowking will often give itself 0 speed IVs and a negative speed nature to be as slow as possible in the mirror matchup. But what if the enemy does exactly the same thing? Then it's a 50-50 speed tie. Some players go as far as running a lower level Pokemon just to be that little bit slower and be able to slow pivot out. Like a level 99 Galarian Slowking with 0 speed IVs and a minus nature, so that they can ensure that the Chilly Reception on their end happens first. But goodness gracious, what if this keeps going and we start seeing level 98 or level 97 Galarian Slowking? Surely not. Surely that's madness. But reverse speed creep is a concept as well, because in some scenarios in mirror matches, you would rather be slower. Up next is Hacked Chansey. The most powerful hacked Pokemon in the whole game, with all the options in the entire world at your disposal, is not a broken legendary like Mega Rayquaza, or even a fancy form like a Mega Form that can now equip an item. The most powerful hacked Pokemon is Chansey, even in pure Hackmons. This is because of the ability Imposter. You see, Imposter is the ability that Ditto has, and Imposter allows your Pokemon to become a copy of the enemy. But Ditto is designed with a drawback in mind, because Ditto has a low HP stat, and the only stat that you don't directly copy is HP. So you will be a slightly weaker copy of the enemy, with a lower base HP stat. But this is Hackmons, and so you can use this drawback baked into Imposter as an advantage now. Chansey has an enormous HP stat of base 250. So when it transforms into the enemy with the ability Imposter, it becomes a superior version of the enemy with an unbelievable base 250 HP stat, which is a significantly higher HP stat than most Pokemon in existence. But there's more, because Chansey is a not fully evolved Pokemon, so it can equip the item Eviolite. Eviolite will grant 1.5x defense and special defense if you are not fully evolved. This is the reason you use Chansey and not Blissey, because not only are you copying the enemy and being a superior version of them with a massive HP stat, you also are still considered not fully evolved even if you're transforming into a fully evolved Pokemon. So you also on top of that get a 1.5x defense and special defense boost. So there's nothing more powerful in the whole game than a Chansey switching in and just becoming a way stronger version of the Pokemon in front of it. Because think about it, it's not just stupid little Pokemon you're copying here, it's the best of the best. It's hacked Pokemon with the strongest abilities of all time. So if anything is popular in this, and powerful in this, like Primal Groudon, you know what's better than that? Imposter Chansey transforming into a Primal Groudon with a way higher HP stat and an Eviolite on top. That's even better. And Chansey can consistently keep doing this and just scout the opposing sets as well. Because when you transform into the enemy, you see their entire moveset, because you've copied them. So that you can use this to gain information. It's completely safe and free because Chansey's so powerful when it switches in and so bulky. You're also not spending any PP because every single time you transform into a new copy of the enemy with 5 PP on each move. So it's completely resource efficient to just constantly transform into the enemy with Chansey. So Imposter Chansey in Hackmons is maybe the most broken Pokemon in existence. Maybe the most powerful thing that humanity can possibly conceive. Up next is Nintendo Cup 97. Nintendo Cup 97 was the first official Pokemon tournament ever held in the Generation 1 video games. This format had a similar rule set to Battle Spot Singles, where you would bring 6 Pokemon and have a team of 6 Pokemon, but you're only allowed to pick 3 to use in the battle itself. It also had a weird rule where there was a total level limit. The Pokemon on your team have to have a level between 50 and 55 to be legal. And also, the 3 Pokemon that you bring to a battle cannot exceed a total level of 155. There was a species clause, which means you cannot have 2 Pokemon of the same species on a team. And a sleep clause, which is interesting because even back then there was a sleep clause. This was later implemented in Stadium and is even used in many competitive singles formats on Smogon today. It basically means that no 2 Pokemon can be put to sleep at a time. This was also played on the Pokemon Red and Green versions in Japan, so there were unique quirks within those games that were present, like Blizzard having a 30% freeze chance being the most significant. That means Blizzard was the best move in the game in these formats here. This is quite an interesting relic to look back on. They were insistent, even back then, on the idea that you don't bring 6 Pokemon to an actual battle. You pick 3 from a team of 6. And also, this was more of a novelty event, not treated as seriously as competitive Pokemon is treated today. But still very interesting to look back on. Up next is AG, and this stands for Anything Goes. Anything Goes is a format above Ubers with absolutely no rules to it. You can run as many of the same Pokemon as you want. There's no sleep clause, so you can spam sleep moves. And the reason that this format came into existence is because of the Pokemon Mega Rayquaza. In Generation 6, Mega Rayquaza was so ridiculously overpowered compared to everything else that Ubers couldn't even handle it. Ubers is supposed to be the format where the broken Pokemon are allowed to exist, but here's Mega Rayquaza, a Pokemon so broken that it was a problem even in Ubers. So they had to make a new format to contain Mega Rayquaza in. Mega Rayquaza was banned from Ubers, and Anything Goes was born, because people still wanted to use Mega Rayquaza somewhere. Anything Goes is a complete Wild West. It's a fun format, honestly, if you just want to goof around. I once brought a team of 6 mucks, all with minimized spam, abusing evasion, which is banned in every other format, but here, I am allowed to boost my evasion as much as I want, aren't I? 6 mucks was doing me pretty well, I can't lie. You can also run like Vivillon, because Vivillon has Quiver Dance and Sleep Powder and Compound Eyes. So you can just put everything to sleep and keep Quiver Dancing and just sweep everything. That's a bit stupid. Some just choose to run 6 Mega Rayquazas, because if you can, why not? My experience playing this format is that it's mostly people goofing around and not taking it too seriously, which can be fun in its own right. Up next we've got LGPE OU, which stands for Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee OU. Many forget about this format, but it does exist. The Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee games were interesting. They are Gen 1 remakes with very stripped back mechanics. It's sort of a blend of modern Pokemon and classic Gen 1 Pokemon. There are no abilities, and there are also no EVs. The Pokemon kind of just exist using their base stats. There is a system in the game called AVs, but these had to be banned because they could provide too many bonus stats to the point where everything was just a ginormous blob of stats that was indestructible. So they had to ban that. But at the same time, even though there's this stripped back system that feels a lot like Gen 1, which also didn't have EVs or abilities, you have modern mechanics here too. The Fairy type is here, Stealth Rock is here, Scald is here, modern moves, and even Mega Evolution is here, which is interesting because there's Mega Evolution without abilities on the Mega Forms. And it's also mostly the Kanto Pokedex here, so you have Mega Beedrill and Blastoise, etc., but not Megas for Pokemon from later Pokedexes, mostly just the Kanto fellas. There are also Alolan Pokemon, like the Alolan Muck and Alolan Ninetales, Alolan forms of Pokemon that were present in the Kanto Pokedex, for a bit more variety too. I said mostly the Kanto Pokedex. It's entirely the Kanto Pokedex, except for Melmetal, who's the only exception. I think because there was a Pokemon Go tie-in, and Melmetal is a Pokemon Go Pokemon. So you can use Melmetal here, who feels very out of place, I must say, with all the classic Kanto fellas. And then there's just a big gear creature with double Iron Bash and stuff. What are you doing here, Melmetal? What are you doing here among Pikachu and such? This format also has the interesting Buddy Pikachu and Buddy Eevee, I think they're called, with their own ridiculously powerful signature moves, such as Baddie Bad, the funniest Pokemon move in history. Baddie Bad, they're calling it. I don't think anyone uses that, but I would like to draw attention to it anyway. Sizzly Slide is one of them, which has a 100% burn chance on it. There's all these broken, crazy moves for Eevee and Pikachu. Although I don't even think they're that good in OU with these moves, because they're still just Pikachu and Eevee with terrible stats. But still, that's something to note. That's certainly a unique part of the format that's worth mentioning at the very least. I don't personally like the format very much. I just think it's bizarre, and I don't see much appeal to it. And it's not that popular either, but some people do quite like it. It is certainly a weird blend of modern Pokemon with these stripped back decks of old gens. It's like a modern old gen, which sort of has some appeal, perhaps, if you're into that. And also with Mega Evolutions, but without abilities. Having Megas in a Gen 1 adjacent metagame is a fun idea, I suppose. Up next on the iceberg is Divecats. This is a term that refers to the exploits of Lipard and Purloin, a father and son duo that have done some unspeakable things together. These two, with their ability Prankster, can do a lot of game-breaking nonsense. The move Assist is a crazy move in Pokemon that is a status move that will randomly utilize one of your team members' moves. Lipard and Purloin can use Assist with priority on it thanks to Prankster, and therefore they can grant priority to a lot of moves that aren't supposed to have priority. One of the notable examples is Roar. With the combination of Assist, calling Roar, if your team is built in such a way that this is guaranteed, you will roar the enemy repeatedly with priority, and if hazards are up, this can win you the whole battle, because you just roar as they slowly die to hazards. And the other synergy you can use is with Dive. Dive is a water type attack that on the first turn will plunge you underwater, making you invulnerable temporarily. And then you rise up afterwards and attack on the second turn. The reason that the cats can utilize Dive and become the Divecats is because they can equip the item Lagging Tail. Lagging Tail means that you always go last in a turn with your moves. You always move last in the prior bracket. And what happens is that if you use Assist and call Dive, the Prankster priority boost bypasses Lagging Tail. You have priority. So they would have to also have priority to match you, which often they don't. So first you would dive with priority and become invulnerable. But then on the second turn, you are just executing Dive normally, not with a Prankster boosted assist. So therefore the Lagging Tail does activate and you move second. And this is important because you remain invulnerable until the attack happens. So you basically get the best of both worlds and remain completely invulnerable the whole time. Because you dive, become invulnerable, stay invulnerable, then attack second. So you just have this invincible cat constantly diving and slowly defeating you over time, with little bits of chip damage from the dive attacks. How dastardly, how devious. And Lipard and Purloin could both do this, because they're both having the combo of Prankster and Assist, aren't they? The move Assist is banned in competitive, largely because of these cats. Up next we have Itemless Sets. There are some contexts in competitive Pokemon where you actually don't want to hold an item, and there are various reasons you might want to do this. The first occurred way back in the Gen 2 metagame. In Generation 2, the only item removal that existed in the game was the move Thief. Thief is a move wherein it attacks the enemy, and if you are not holding an item yourself, you will steal their item. So this is an incentive to not run an item, so that you can thief the enemy's item. And this is useful to, for example, steal leftovers from Snorlax, or Zapdos, or these key defensive targets that get a lot out of their leftovers over the course of a game. Thief is actually a pretty great strategy in Gen 2 on offense teams, so for that reason, itemless Thief sets are used in that context. You do occasionally see Thief as well in Gen 3, even though Knockoff exists in this Gen 2, which is a better move for item removal. It's very rare, so way more Pokemon get Thief, and therefore sometimes you see these Thief sets. Another reason you might want to be itemless is because of the move Acrobatics. Acrobatics is a flying type attack with 55 power, but if you are not holding an item, the power doubles. Now usually what players do is they will run a consumable item with this, so that after their item is consumed, they get the acrobatics value and have double power, because they're not holding an item after it is consumed. But you can also just directly run no item, purely to benefit from this acrobatics power boost, and it's a significant one. That's a 110 power flying type move effectively, which is really strong with no real drawback as well, besides you not having to hold an item. So sometimes Pokemon like Talonflame will deliberately run no item. Another reason you might want to run no item is to defend against certain moves. Knockoff is a move that will remove your item while also dealing 1.5x damage when it's in the process of removing an item. So it's actually valid sometimes to be completely itemless so that Knockoff deals less damage to you. And since you're switching it on Knockoff anyway, you don't care about having an item in the first place. Another move that you can defend against is Poltergeist. Poltergeist is a ghost type attack that will apparently use the item of the enemy as a weapon and hit them with it. And it will not work if the enemy's not holding an item. And this is significant. Poltergeist is a really high power ghost type physical move, often the main source of damage for a lot of Pokemon. So to be completely immune to Poltergeist by not holding an item and also take reduced damage from Knockoff is a real reason to just not run an item. It might seem completely bizarre to not run an item in competitive, but there are many valid reasons to do so actually. And the final entry in layer 5 of the Iceberg is Shoddy. Shoddy Battle is an older battle simulator even than Pokemon Online. Pokemon Online, despite how archaic it looks, was considered a significant step up when Shoddy was the only thing available. In Shoddy Battle, the UI is even more bare bones. You have to tick a box to represent what move you are utilizing. And also, when you're switching a Pokemon, you just click on them from a switch menu. A lot of UI elements don't show, and you got to keep track of a lot of stuff manually. It was a very bare bones simulator, but this was used in the Generation 4 metagames, and was the best thing available at the time. I never personally played this one. I was Pokemon Online, and I recall Pokemon Online. Shoddy Battle was before my time, but many do remember Shoddy Battle, sometimes with fondness, sometimes they say, thank goodness we've moved past this one, this primitive battler. Moving on to Layer 6 of the Iceberg. The first entry is Hacked Pikachu. Hacked Pikachu is a powerful Pokemon in Hackmons, in a similar way to Chansey actually. You see, Pikachu has the exclusive item Light Ball, which is an extraordinarily powerful item. This item will double Pikachu's attack and special attack, but of course it only works on Pikachu, and that's the drawback, is that Pikachu is not very powerful. But what if, like Chansey, you give Pikachu the ability Imposter? Then it can transform into the enemy, and now it is a version of the enemy with double offensive stats. And this is crazy if you can pull it off in the right scenario, because then you can become basically like having a huge power version of, I don't know, Rayquaza or something. Double attack is crazy, and it still applies here. Even though you're transforming into Rayquaza, you are still Pikachu, and therefore you're still benefiting from the effect of the Light Ball. So Hacked Pikachu has a genuine reason to exist, folks. Now, it is a bit of a gimmick, I will say, because with Imposter you do have the low base HP of Pikachu to contend with, and you also will have the exact same speed stat as the enemy, and therefore you have to win a speed tie to actually take advantage of the Light Ball Imposter version of what you are transforming into. But if you do pull it off, or if you're in a matchup where, for whatever reason, you can survive an incoming hit while KOing them, then you're in business, and then you're one of the most powerful beings in history. But it's a big if, isn't it? Up next we have Gen 1 Best of 3 Drama. So Smogon Premier League is a tournament I mentioned in the previous parts, and it's a team tournament where you have dedicated players for each generation. And Generation 1 is different in Smogon Premier League. You see, in every other generation, you play a best of 1 battle, and the winner of that battle gets a point for your team, except in Gen 1, where they play a best of 3 set. This is because Gen 1 is a high variance format. A lot of random nonsense can happen in Gen 1, so it's considered more fair to allow a best of 3 set for the Gen 1 players specifically. Now, it is a bit arbitrary that just one generation gets to play best of 3s while everyone else is playing best of 1s. And some argue that Gen 1 is not that much higher in variance than other generations, and that they should also play best of 3s. But regardless, this is just how it's been for a long time. And in 2023, the decision was made by a tournament director to stop this from being the case, and have Gen 1 also be required to play a best of 1 rather than a best of 3. And this was in the name of consistency, so that everything was the same. Every single format is playing a best of 1. And they believed it was arbitrary to begin with that Gen 1 alone played a best of 3. But the Gen 1 community hated this decision, and it was very unpopular. Part of the reason they hated it is obviously because they prefer to play best of 3s. They think that they are more fair. I also think you consider the fact that Gen 1 has simpler team building. Players obviously do prepare very extensively, especially in higher level play. But still, Gen 1 teams are just simpler by definition than other generations, because there's so much less in the game. So playing a best of 3 is not as much of a mental commitment, where in other gens you would have to build completely different teams that are more complicated. I think that's something to consider as well, that the best of 3 sort of fits better with Gen 1 in that sense. But the worst part of this, in the Gen 1 community's eyes, was the fact that they were not asked their opinion. This decision was just made without consulting anyone in the Gen 1 community, and in fact, many of them said that they would boycott SPL and not compete unless it was reverted back. A significant amount of them said this, that they would refuse to play if they had to play best of 1. And so because of this backlash from the Gen 1 community, the decision was reversed and Gen 1 became best of 3 again. Now, this whole debacle raised concerns about the tournament directors maybe having too much power and just being able to make changes like this without consulting the communities affected by them, and that's certainly a valid concern. If you ask me though, and this is a hot take that I have, I think that SPL is a bit of an overrated tournament. It's a very strange format for a tournament, to be honest. It is a series of best of 1s where you have a team of like 9 players all competing in a separate generation. It does feel like the individual best of ones don't matter as much as the overall team's performance, and it's incredibly difficult to follow as a spectator. Personally, I do look at SPL replays for examples of interesting Pokemon sets used and stuff, but following the tournament is impossible. Like, how am I supposed to know that, oh, they had 5 wins in these gens this week, but 4 losses, but then they have more points, so they progress? It's too much to follow, and it's just a bunch of best of ones happening. I don't know why this is treated as the most prestigious Smogon tournament and not just like a traditional tournament where individuals compete and play best of 3 sets and just progress through a bracket like normal, which you can follow logically. That's why it is the most common tournament format in many contexts, right? I don't know why Smogon has so much emphasis on team tournaments when this is an individual game. You are one player battling one other player. Team tournaments, if anything, should be, in my opinion, a novelty rather than the big prestigious tournament. It would be like in Smash Brothers if crew battles were more prestigious than just a normal tournament bracket. Crew battles are a fun novelty. There's skill to them, there's strategy to the team compositions and the order of players, but to treat crew battles as the main competitive format, I think would be absurd, or to treat a crew battle tournament as like a huge event of the year would be a bit weird, right? I think you gotta objectively say that best of ones are less competitive than best of 3s. Pokemon is a high variance game even in Gen 9. A best of 1 is a terrible way to figure out who's the better player, I think. There's obviously still skill to it. The better player will probably win, but there's a higher chance of nonsense bailing them out or whatever. There's a reason that normal bracket tournaments are not played with best of 1. They are best of 3. So I do think it's a bit weird that in particular Gen 1 has best of 3 in SPL. I don't see why other gens shouldn't also be best of 3 here. It's because it would be a lot of prep, and there's a lot of games to play and stuff, and it would complicate things, but I would argue that this is a convoluted tournament format to begin with. Maybe the real problem is SPL's existence? Is that controversial to say? Because all of the great players devote much of their time in the year in prep and gameplay to SPL, which sort of siphons their energy towards SPL and means that they don't compete as much in other tournaments in some cases. Like, they've spent all their damn energy on SPL, and then room for other tournaments is not as available to them. And you, the viewers, as spectators of Pokemon, might be aware of individual SPL games that have happened where something novel occurred, like an iconic game. But there's no way, probably, that you are aware of, like, the teams and the players in the teams, which change every year anyway, so who the hell cares about the teams when every year they're different? You don't know who's currently winning, you're not following the SPL games as they're happening. There's just no way. It's not a followable tournament. It's not a sensical structure to follow as a spectator, and it's not really for spectators. I feel like it's for Smogon gamers who are so used to the format that they're the only ones who like it. It feels like it. I've gone on a bit of a tangent here, but I think it's an important point that perhaps this drama surrounding best of 3 in Gen 1 stems from the fundamental issues with SPL as a tournament. Up next we have Gen 5 tiering. Gen 5 is the most infamous generation of competitive Pokemon because of how difficult it was to balance and how the tiering was handled while it was current. Gen 5 was a massive power spike for the franchise, introducing ridiculous concepts like permanent weather in OU thanks to Politoed receiving Drizzle and Ninetales receiving Drought. You had other absurd buffs like Blaziken receiving Speed Boost, new Pokemon like Excadrill with Sand Rush, Alakazam and Reuniclus with Magic Guard, Cloyster with Shell Smash, and Skill Link. The new gem items, which allowed offensive threats to power through their checks thanks to ridiculous bonus damage, and a guessing game from the opponent as to which gem they're carrying. I have a video going over every single ban and tiering action that has happened in Gen 5, and it's a very long video because much has happened and continues to happen even after the generation had been current. Fairly recently, there have been Pokemon bans and item bans and rule set changes in Gen 5. It is a tier that is very difficult to balance. And I think its identity has sort of been shaped by the way it was tiered. Back when it was current, I think they were a bit hesitant to take drastic action, and they allowed overpowered stuff to exist in the tier perhaps for a bit too long. And so the brokenness of Gen 5 is baked into its identity. It's what people remember about it. And people are upset when you ban, like, Chlorophyll, for example, because they grew up playing with Chlorophyll Venusaur on Pokemon Online because it was legal for ages. So how do you reconcile with that? And what even is Gen 5 supposed to be? Nobody knows. It is a tumultuous format, but also an overhated format in my opinion. A lot of people only know this about it, but there's a million bans and it's broken. It's also very unique. There's really cool stuff that is only viable in Gen 5. It feels like a whole different planet, and that makes it fun in my opinion. Up next in the Iceberg, we've got Kyurem vote was rigged. In Generation 9, there was fairly recently a suspect test for the Pokemon Kyurem. A suspect test is where players get to vote on the fate of a Pokemon, whether it gets banned or not. And they do this by qualifying to vote on the ladder. They have to make a fresh account and reach a certain combination of ELO rating and GXE to be allowed to vote on the Pokemon. And initially, once the suspect test was over, the result was to ban Kyurem, and Kyurem was then banned. But then, something was discovered. It was revealed that one player was farming a bunch of alternate accounts that had achieved voter requirements, and then giving out these alt accounts to players on Smogon so that they could vote ban on Kyurem, rigging the vote. These players that voted did not achieve the requirements themselves. They just borrowed an account from someone else that was grinding like crazy, single-handedly, and distributing a bunch of accounts. This is obviously not allowed. It's cheating. You have to yourself reach the requirements to be able to vote on the Pokemon. So, all of these illegitimate ban votes were discarded, and then it turned out that with all these ban votes discarded, the result was now, do not ban Kyurem. So Kyurem's status in OU was restored, it was unbanned, and remains legal to this day. How absurd is that, folks? A lot of people think that Kyurem should still be banned, though. It's one of the most powerful Pokemon, but the metagame is adapting to its presence. SZU actually rose up to OU purely because of its positive matchup against Kyurem with priority Bullet Punch and nice type resistances to its common attacking types. I've even seen one player use Bronzong as a Kyurem answer because it is resistant to ice and immune to ground, making it match up against the Icicle Spear, Freeze Dry Earth Power coverage combo that Kyurem abuses. Hopefully Kyurem will become more manageable over time. We'll see, but still a humorous event to be banned and then unbanned due to a rigging scandal. How insane. And up next we have Gen 9 tiering. If there's one generation that has been crazier even than Gen 5, it's Gen 9. Gen 9 is probably the most divisive and the craziest competitive Pokemon format in terms of the sheer amount of stuff that has happened, the sheer imbalance of it all. And also the metagame resetting multiple times with Pokemon Home and DLC coming out, leading to unbans and rebans again and all this stuff. At the root of all of this is Terastallization, the new Gen 9 gimmick mechanic, which allows your Pokemon once per battle to transform into a preset type, gaining the defensive properties of the type and losing the defensive properties of its previous typing. It also gains extra stab damage for that type, and if you Terastallize into the same type you already were, you gain additional damage on top. It's kinda like Z moves but better, because the damage boost is permanent, and there's also defensive application for it. You can transform into a type that benefits you defensively. You also gain stab on the new type, but you don't lose stab damage on the types that you were previously either, so you basically have 3 stab types now. Terastallization is incredibly powerful, especially on boost sweepers, that can gain a free turn from becoming a new defensive type, and gain extra damage on a coverage option, or just further damage on their main stab moves. There's even the move Terra Blast, which in its base state is a normal type special attack with 80 power, but as soon as you Terastallize, it will transform into the type matching your Terra type, and it will change from physical or special depending on which your highest stat is. This allows for a universal coverage option similar to Hidden Power, but more powerful because of its 80 power and bonus stab damage on top, which also enhances boost sweepers. This mechanic was initially suspect tested to be banned from the game, but ultimately not, supported enough to be banned and remains legal to this day. But there have been many balance issues stemming from the decision not to ban terrestrialization, as it has been the straw that broke the camel's back for many Pokemon, pushing them over the edge into brokenness. We've seen bans on such threats as Volcarona and Espathra and Roaring Moon and various others. People are even recently talking about a Dragonite ban because of how much terrestrialization buffs these kinds of ridiculous boost sweepers. Baxcalibur as well. Many examples, really. But it's not just terrestrialization breaking the game, it's also the ridiculous moves in Pokemon they've added, like the Paradox Pokemon. Fluttermane is an incredibly powerful Pokemon akin to a legendary. I mean, look at this thing. Ridiculous stats, perfect typing. There's Iron Bundle, very similar. Absurdly statted, ridiculous offensive special attacker. Palafin is a new Pokemon that you just switch it out and back in and it turns into a damn legendary. As a mono water type with a strong priority move, Jet Punch. And there's more. You got Chien Pao, Chi Yu, which are just ridiculously strong attackers. There's been Baxcalibur, I mentioned. The new pseudo-legendary Duraludon was a crazy one on rain teams with its move Electro Shot. Last Respects was a whole thing. It's one of the most powerful moves in history. Literally banned in Ubers, it's that good. This is a move that gains base power for each fainted ally up to 300 power, I think it was. Just a stupid move. There's Rage Fist is similar, gaining power for each time you get hit, scaling up to astronomical levels. Shed Tail is Substitute and Baton Pass combined. Who thought that was a good idea? That's crazy. Utilized by Orthworm and Cyclizar, who do not look threatening at all, but certainly were. Gen 9's tiering has been the most ridiculous and chaotic I have ever seen. But frankly, I think that this much tiering action is necessary for this game that is so imbalanced. They have no regard whatsoever for singles balance anymore, with doubles growing more and more, and the official competitive format probably overtaking singles as the more popular one. So they've sort of left the 6v6 singles community with a weird mess of a game to balance, and they've done a pretty good job, I think. Gen 9 in its current state is much more balanced than it was initially, because of all this constant action. Regardless of how much you think a game should be modified from its base state, I don't know, at the end of the day it's a fan community, they can do what they want, they believe that action is necessary here to create a balanced format. I think I agree, even though I disagree maybe with individual choices made. Overall, probably a good thing. Up next is STABMons. STABMons is a very interesting alternate competitive Pokemon format, where in this rule set, Pokemon are able to learn every single move of their type. So Gyarados is able to learn every single water type move in the game and every single flying type move in the game. This means that rare signature moves, usually available only to one or a couple Pokemon, are now available to all Pokemon of the type. So rock types all have access to the powerful move Stone Axe. Flying types all have access to Dragon Ascent, which is usually only available on Rayquaza. And that's a huge one because a lot of flying type Pokemon don't have a good flying physical attack. Now, Landorus Therian has this, and Gyarados has this, and that's huge. I think STABMons is a really cool format. It really expands the team building possibilities and options on Pokemon, and it means that you have more excuses to use these rare signature moves that are just never seen. And these can serve to buff types that are considered bad sometimes. Now, all Pokemon of that type get access to the broken signature move, and that's a big deal. Up next on the iceberg is Chatterban. Chatter is a move exclusive to the Pokemon Chatot. I previously called this Pokemon Chartot, and I would like to apologize. I thought that he was fond of drinking some tea, you know, Chartot. He likes to her-char, I thought. I was wrong, he likes to chat. He's a chatter. He's Chatot, okay? He doesn't like to drink tea at all. It's too hot for him, it burns him, it's terrible. It's dreadful. He likes to chat and speak to people. He likes to get to know people. Anyway, I'm off topic, aren't I? Chatter is a move exclusive to the Pokemon that is actually quite a good move in modern games. It has 65 power. In the modern games, it's a special attack, and it has a 100% confuse chance. That's pretty damn good, huh? You can cause some real nonsense with a move like this. Back in the days of the DS, though, this was a novel move, because it was a move that could use the DS microphone. When using the move, you had to speak into the actual DS microphone, and the louder you were, the higher the power of the move. and then the opponent would hear the recorded message on their end. How fun. What a novel idea. You could utilize the gimmicky DS microphone for a fun advantage, except they soon realized that in online battles, players could say obscene things, obscenities, and they would be recorded, and there's no filter on here. This is primitive technology. So you could say whatever you wanted and it would be broadcast to your opponent. That's a bit of a problem, isn't it? And it was an even bigger problem in tournaments, especially if there's a damn stream broadcast where someone could theoretically say anything they want into the damn microphone and have it be heard worldwide on an official Nintendo broadcast. So they couldn't have that, and for this reason, chatter, the move chatter, was banned from Pokemon tournaments in the DS days. Chatot, how could you do it? How could it be you? Up next is NetBattle. This is another battle simulator that predates Pokemon Showdown, and Pokemon Online, and even Shoddy Battle. And this was a battle simulator that existed back when Gen 3 was current. Yes, even all the way back then there were battle simulators and a competitive community that in fact predates the establishment of Smogon. NetBattle was pretty cool for the time. I think it actually had a bit more UI than Shoddy Battle did, and it had unique features like custom sprites for Pokemon, and the Gen 3 metagame of that time was rather primitive. I believe Donphan and Dusclops were popular in those days, which is not the case as much in modern times, but back then things were still experimental, things were still being developed, and this is the very early days of competitive singles. A lot of great players that still play to this day, like M-Dragon and Vapakuno, started back in NetBattle. And in fact, some of the stuff that they came up with back then is still relevant today, amazingly. Some truly great minds were spawned from the NetBattle era. And the final entry in the 6th layer of the iceberg here is CAP. CAP stands for Create a Pokemon. And this is another fan format by Smogon where there is completely fan-made Pokemon in the game, and they are actually really impressively designed. I believe that the process for submitting a CAP Pokemon is an elaborate one, where the metagame is analyzed and they figure out what would be good for the metagame. There's a collaborative process to design the guy in the first place, and then they figure out what its visual design and name are after that. Something like that. Forgive me if I've gotten some details wrong there. But the results are pretty fantastic. My favorite CAP Pokemon is Mollux. This is an awesome little snail creature with a lava lamp as a snail shell. And how good is this 3D model look? This looks like it could be in the game for real. It's a great creature design, and it's awesome in terms of its traits as well. It's fire poison type with the ability dry skin, meaning it is immune to water. That is such a cool type profile, and it's a rapid spinner. It has recover, lava plume, and options like that. So it's this really, really cool defensive utility Pokemon that is surprisingly viable for a fire poison type, which you wouldn't think would be that great. I also really like Voodoo, who's a fighting dark type based on a voodoo doll. How cool is this 3D model? It has such character with the little animations. And it has Volt Absorb, which is so fun. It's like a Frankenstein getting hit by a lightning bolt or something. Also has Lightning Rod and Cursed Body. Very flavorful ability choices on this. Just an awesome design, huh? And I mean, I could spend ages just looking at CAP Pokemon and talking about how cool they are. But I'll do one more here. Commodore is another one of the coolest ones. Look at this crazy steel flying type bird with a backwards cap. Looks like a mascot character from a 90s cartoon or something. This is great. And it's a lot like Skarmory with high defense, but it also has high speed. It has Volt Absorb, which is really good with its typing. It also has Intimidate as another option. And it's got Belly Drum. It's a Belly Drum sweeper, which is pretty unique for a Pokemon like this. Arc Cap is one of the coolest and most underrated fan projects in the Pokemon community, with some of the best fan-made Pokemon designs I've ever seen, to be honest. Some people critique them for being a bit over-designed and too competitively designed, that they don't feel realistic to actual Pokemon. In some cases I would agree with that, but in other cases I think that the design is just great and really flavorful and well thought out. It's a hard thing to design a good Pokemon, and I think that they mostly nail it with the CAP project, in my opinion. Layer 7 begins. And the first entry is Goat Debate. The question of which Pokemon is the greatest of all time in competitive is an interesting one, with many possible answers. I have a competitive singles bias, of course, so that's how I will probably look at the question. In doubles, it's also probably just Incineroar. So that simplifies it, unless maybe there's a Mega, or you count restricted or something. Even then, I think Incineroar is probably the best because it's not a restricted and also provides ridiculous value. But in singles, it's more complicated than that. Many point to Landorus Therian as a contender for being so excellent and so high usage ever since it has existed in Gen 5, even persisting through severe nerfs in Gen 9. Landorus Therian remains at the top of OU usage charts still. Another strong contender is Ferrothorn. Ferrothorn also released in Gen 5 and is top tier in every single generation it exists in, even going as far as dominating in Uber's formats as a go-to Steel-type utility Pokemon, contending with such threats as Kyogre and Xerneas and Arceus. There is also Gliscor. Gliscor released in Gen 4 where it was ranked in OU immediately, and then it skyrocketed to great competitive viability in Gen 5, receiving the ability Poison Heal, which was a huge buff. In Gen 9 it was even banned for a time, it was so good. Got unbanned after a meta reset, and it remains kind of controversial in Gen 9 because it was buffed further. It gained spikes, and it benefits greatly from Terra as well, with its Swords Dance Terra Normal Facade set being a particular problem. Gliscor, I think, is probably a contender for greatest of all time. I think there are probably two top contenders though. One of them is Zapdos. Zapdos is of course a Gen 1 Pokemon that was a great OU Pokemon as soon as it released in the first generation. And unlike most other contemporaries of the time like Rhydon and Tauros that fell off majorly in later generations, Exeggutor 2, Zapdos persisted. Zapdos stood the test of time better than any of them. And it is ranked OU in every single generation except the rare case of Gen 5, where it is outclassed by Thundurus Therian. But besides that, Zapdos is OU and competitively viable in every single generation, including Gen 9, where it is still really, really common and really, really powerful. So Zapdos, I think, is a clear contender for this GOAT debate. And then there's Tyranitar, who has not existed for as long, but has existed for almost as long. Tyranitar came out in Gen 2, where it was immediately great, with its great stats and access to Pursuit and its incredible move pool and stuff. In Gen 3, it skyrocketed as a result of the new ability Sandstream, turning it into the best Pokemon in the whole game. In Gen 4, they buffed it further, granting a special defense boost to rock types in the sand, and also the whole physical special split benefiting it massively with new options. So Tyranitar is arguably also the number one Pokemon in Gen 4. It is S tier alongside Latias and Jirachi. There's debate about who's the best between those three, but Tyranitar's up there. In Gen 5, Tyranitar remains central, with its permanent weather being more valuable as a preventative measure against rain and sun teams, and its Pursuit being more valuable against the new Alakazam and Reuniclus. In Gen 6, Tyranitar receives a Mega, and it's a great Mega, but actually it's one of those Pokemon where the base form is just as good if not better than the Mega, because it can run Assault Vest and different items like Choice Scarf, plus it still functions really well without a Mega at all. And Tyranitar just persists in OU in every gen, except Gen 9 where it has now fallen off. But some say that it might rise. Tyranitar usage has actually increased recently, and if this trend continues and the next tier shift happens, Tyranitar might rise back up to OU again. It got obviously massively nerfed in Gen 8 with the loss of Pursuit, but by the end of Gen 8, it ended up OU anyway, just because of its inherent great strengths, Sand Chip, high special bulk, breaking power, move pool. And these traits are returning to the relevance in Gen 9, plus the added benefit of it receiving the buff of Knockoff, which was really huge for it. So Tyranitar also has a great claim. I think between these two, who can say? Zapdos probably has a better argument, I think, for overall consistency and existence even in Gen 1 and constantly being OU viable forever. But you could make the case for Tyranitar too, I think. We might see where it ends up in Gen 9. If Tyranitar ends up OU in Gen 9, it'll be OU ranked in every gen it exists in, which would probably push it further to being the greatest Pokemon of all time. Which side do you fight for? Are you a member of Zapdos Gang or Tyranitar Nation? Let me know, folks. Let me know. It's a very important issue of our time, and you have to pick a side quickly. Tyranitar is my personal goat, if you're wondering, but I wouldn't necessarily say that with 100% confidence. There's bias there because I think he's very cool as well. Up next is BDSP OU, which stands for Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl OU, another often forgotten competitive Pokemon format. The Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl games were considered by most to be a disappointment. They're probably the worst received Pokemon games in this series, with an awkward art style, a disappointing amount of content, glitches, and just not really being an improvement over the original Gen 4 titles, which still hold up in the eyes of many. They just weren't very well received. But I would say that that reputation for the single-player games unfairly affected the competitive metagame here, which is actually, I think, a pretty underrated competitive metagame. In some ways, it's similar to Let's Go Pikachu OU, with a stripped-back Pokédex and some less content, but in BDSP OU there are abilities and EVs and held items. And despite being based on the Gen 4 Pokédex, it can't help but feel pretty distinct. Gen 4 has no team preview, which has a big impact on competitive play. Gen 4 also lacks the fairy type. And these are probably the most significant differences about BDSP OU. In this format, there is also Garchomp, who was legal to use, which was not the case back in Gen 4. The Pokédex is familiar, but all of these Pokemon are doing different things here. Team preview changes the decision-making dynamics. And I think it's actually a pretty interesting metagame with some fun Pokemon at the forefront. What's crazy is that Gengar is actually banned in this format because it was too powerful. There wasn't enough good ghost resistances to stop simple Choice Specs Shadow Ball spam of all things. And there is also no Pursuit in BDSP OU, which is kind of interesting, meaning Gengar doesn't have that reliable form of trapping and counterplay that existed in original Gen 4 OU. BDSP also cut every item that exists post Gen 4. So there's no heavy-duty boots here, there's no assault vest. You just have the Gen 4 item. So if the thesis statement of this metagame is to be Gen 4 OU with modern mechanics, I think it is successful. And it feels different enough to actual Gen 4 OU to have some reason to exist. It probably is never going to be that popular though, just because it is a not well-liked single-player game and the community is quite niche for it. And also Gen 4 OU is already on the ladder, which feels similar. But I thought it was worth mentioning in this video here, and defending a little bit too. Up next is Bloo cheating scandal. Bloo was the name of a once respected Smogon player and tournament director that ended up embroiled in a scandal, ultimately resulting in a full-on ban from Smogon. So what happened? At the time, there was an up-and-coming superstar by the name of Style, who had allegedly only been playing for a couple of months, but who was putting up unbelievable results, defeating veteran players easily, and winning 8 straight games in a row in a very competitive tournament called the official Smogon tournament. And Style ended up making it all the way to the finals of the tournament. And many players found this a bit odd. How could this allegedly completely new player, only playing for a couple of months, achieve such absurdly dominant results in this very competitive tournament? And then people discovered something interesting. They discovered that the player Bloo, who was also the tournament director, was actually giving people advice when they were matched up against Style. And every single time Bloo did this, Style would win the battle. Why would this be the case? Why would it be the case that Bloo is almost cursing these people with bad advice and constantly causing them to lose to this new superstar, Style, who was breaking out in absurd fashion? It turned out that Style was an alternate account of Bloo the entire time. And what Bloo was doing was rigging the bracket deliberately, because Bloo had the privilege to do that as the tournament director. Rigging the bracket against people that she knew, so that she could give them advice on purpose and then gain information about what they would then bring to the tournament, and therefore, as Style, destroy them by, knowing perfect information about their team and being the very person that gave them advice against themselves. goodness, what a crazy scheme this one was. This is almost a damn plotline from Scooby-Doo or something. So, of course, Blue was banned, as was Style, who was blue the whole time. Up next is Hacked Eternatus Eternamax. Now, earlier I said that the most powerful hacked Pokemon in the game is Chansey. There is actually one exception to that, and that is this one, Hacked Eternatus Eternamax. But I would argue that this is not so much a Pokemon as it is an abomination beyond comprehension. Eternatus Eternamax is a boss battle in the Gen 8 game that can only be obtained through hacking the game, much like the Pokestar Spirit mentioned before. So because this was a boss battle not obtainable in the game, they went crazy with it. It has ridiculously high stats. Intentionally so. 255 base HP, 250 base defense and special defense. And it's fast too, because why not? 130 base speed. This is truly a boss battle. An unbelievably powerful, otherworldly force. And this Pokemon has such high base stats that it can break damage calculation itself. Because if you have precisely 655 in a defensive stat, this is so high that it rolls back over to 0 of that defensive stat, either defense or special defense. And when you have a stat of 0, it breaks damage calculation, and the enemy Pokemon can only deal 1 or 2 damage to you from hits. So you can effectively become immortal to an entire category of damage, physical or special, whichever you want. And that is obviously absurdly overpowered. And this is pure hackmons. If there's a fella like this in the game, everyone's just going to run this. So I think every team was just 6 Eternamax Eternatuses abusing this glitch. They would often run neutralizing gas just to disable any possible abilities that could defeat them, and then that's the meta, is this giant blob of enormous stats that is also invincible to one source of damage of its choosing, and this just made the format unplayable. This guy was so powerful that Gen 8 Pure Hackmons was deleted from human memory and erased from the history books completely. Up next we have Pet Mods. Pet Mods are fan formats for Pokemon that are hosted not on the main Pokemon Showdown server, but on alternate servers. And these are more elaborate custom formats with completely custom Pokemon, sometimes even custom abilities and mechanics. One of the most popular ones is Mariomon OU, which you may be aware of from the Alpha Rad Mariomon ROM hack, which was quite popular. Mariomon OU is playable on an alternate Showdown server, and it has fully custom Pokemon from the ROM hack. There is also Infinite Fusion OU, which translates the fan game Infinite Fusion into a playable Showdown format with competitive battling. But some are not even based on ROM hacks, some are just built from the ground up just for competitive play. I used to be a big fan of the Gen 3 pet mod Hoenn Gaiden, which introduced modern Pokemon to Gen 3 OU and revamped them to function in the pre-physical special split environment within Gen 3's unique mechanics. Sort of like a Project M type thing. Taking concepts from later games and porting them into the mechanics of an older game. And another one of my favorites is Fusion Evolution OU, which, unlike Infinite Fusion, doesn't allow players to just choose which Pokemon to fuse and create their own fusion algorithmically. These are individually designed fusions that are custom made for this metagame with their own custom sprites, and they are really cool, like Amphiments and Anaridon. That's Anoriths fused with Coridon, folks. What a concept. And they have really cool custom abilities that combine the effects of both of their abilities in a unique way to create a flavorful combination of the two. I have a video about this format if you're curious. I think it's a really cool one. Pet mods are really damn niche. They're played on separate servers. You gotta find discords to even know what the hell you're doing. Often they lack resources as well to learn them. They're not as established, of course, but I think they're cool anyway. They showcase the creativity of the community and the desire to create unique competitive experiences, and many of them can be surprisingly well made and well thought out. Up next is Orre Colloseum. Orre Colloseum was a playable mode in the Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness game, and it is actually the first ever example of what would become the modern VGC format. Orre Colloseum can be played in a single player campaign, but also can be played in multiplayer battles. And it has the exact same bring 6, pick 4 structure with a doubles format that modern VGC uses. This format also has the item clause, which is a modern staple of VGC, wherein you can only have one of each item on a Pokemon team. Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness has mostly the same mechanics as Gen 3, with no physical special split and most moves functioning the same way, but there are some differences, and one of them is that there's team preview in this game, which is important obviously for being able to see what your opponent's team is and pick 4 Pokemon to battle against them. But also you can actually see your opponent's exact HP values, which gives you information on whether they're invested in HP or not, and is just a lot of great information to have, their exact HP value at all times. It's just displayed on the UI, which is rather unique. I don't even think in later games that this has ever been done before. I think Orre Colloseum is a better format in my opinion than Gen 3 doubles OU, which is the other way to play doubles in Gen 3. I think that the pick 4 system suits doubles well, and I like that there's team preview here as well. And not many people realize that this is the origin of what would become the standard competitive Pokemon format of today. It was invented in this game, in Gale of Darkness. And the final entry of Layer 7 of the Iceberg here is Gen 3 Knockoff Discovery. This was a fairly recent discovery of a Gen 3 mechanic that flew under the radar for decades. What people discovered is that the move Knockoff in Gen 3 doesn't actually remove your opponent's item. It just disables the effect of the item. Technically, they are still holding the item itself. It's just disabled from having an effect. And you might wonder, why is this relevant? Wouldn't that achieve the exact same thing? Well, there's one case where it is relevant. In the past, before this was discovered, Skarmory with Thief was a really good Pokemon against Hariyama. Skarmory with Thief often runs no item in the first place, to then use Thief to steal an enemy's item. But once it steals that item, Hariyama can come in and knock off your item again. But this is really good for Thief Skarmory to lose another item, because it means that you can just use Thief again to steal an additional item from an enemy Pokemon. This made Skarmory great against Hariyama, and it was not worried at all about taking a knockoff, because it just means it could use Thief again and remove more items from the opponent. Except when this mechanic was discovered, it was realized that when Skarmory thiefs an item and then has it knocked off by Hariyama, they actually can't use Thief again, because of the way it works in Gen 3. Their item is not removed by knockoff, it is just disabled. So they technically are still holding the item that was disabled, and Thief will not work. And theoretically, other Pokemon besides Skarm could have used Thief as anti-knockoff technology. After losing your item, you could Thief and then steal it back, or steal another Pokemon's item. But now that people realize how knockoff actually works, Thief will not function after you've received knockoff from Hariyama, because your item's just disabled, not removed. And it's a big distinction. So this was a nerf to the move Thief, I suppose, and a nerf to Thief Skarmory in particular, which was a more popular set previously because of that quirk. But now Showdown has been updated to be cartridge accurate within this mechanic, so that is no longer the case. Quite interesting, isn't it? That such a thing can fly under the radar, and how would you even really discover that? It's a difficult thing to catch. The final layer of the iceberg begins. The first entry, Stadium OU. I'm sure you're all familiar with the video game Pokemon Stadium, a companion game to the Generation 1 Game Boy games. But Stadium actually had its own unique mechanics, and therefore was a distinct metagame from standard Gen 1 OU. Pokemon Stadium was the first Pokemon game to introduce Team Preview, which significantly changes the dynamics of the game, and allows you to see your opponent's team and select a lead, introducing a decision before the battle even begins. That's a significant change. Stadium also changed a lot of mechanics and fixed a lot of bugs. A lot of people are familiar with the fact that in Gen 1, there is a 1 in 256 chance that your move will just miss, even if it's 100% accurate. There's just a flat, random mischance on every single thing. In Pokemon Stadium, it was now changed to 1 in 65,536, which is kind of funny. There's just a really low chance that you can miss. On cartridge, counter is able to store damage and be used the next turn. So you could take a hit and then on the next turn use counter and reflect the damage that you took the previous turn, which is kind of interesting. But that's no longer the case in Stadium, and I believe that was a bug to begin with. The Sleep Clause actually originates from Pokemon Stadium. It was the first game to introduce such a concept, preventing multiple Pokemon from being put to sleep at a time. I mean, Gen 1 OU already uses this, but it's not possible to implement on a Gen 1 cartridge, only on simulators. But Stadium just has it innately, which is quite cool. And sleep itself was nerfed. On cartridge, sleep can last from 0 to 6 turns. Now, it can only last from 0 to 3 turns, half as effective. What's interesting about Pokemon Stadium's Sleep Clause is that rest counts towards the Sleep Clause. So you can actually use rest and put a Pokemon on your team to sleep, and therefore deny the enemy from putting any of your other Pokemon to sleep, which sort of nerfs sleep overall, because rest is already a common healing move, and now if you rest, that counts towards the Sleep Clause. Quite interesting. Substitute was buffed in Stadium to now block status like it does in later games. In cartridge, Substitute will not block status from happening. And probably the biggest move change is that Hyper Beam no longer bypasses its recharge turn if you KO. It will always recharge upon use, even if it gets a KO, which is a massive nerf and changes the whole game, because Hyper Beam with that glitch is central to cartridge Gen 1 OU. Stadium OU is interesting, and it was quite ahead of its time, I think, in terms of introducing a lot of balance to the Gen 1 games and being quite forward-thinking with the Sleep Clause, which is a great rule that is borrowed in simulators later on in the franchise and for some reason absent in later mainline games. I feel like that should just be a tickable option in all the games, like it was in Stadium. Definitely quite impressive. However, regular Gen 1 OU is still preferred. Most prefer the way Hyper Beam works in regular Gen 1. They also prefer the lack of team preview. Those are probably the two main things. So there is not much of a community for Stadium OU. Most players just gravitate to Gen 1 OU. But it's a unique relic in the history of competitive Pokemon, I think, and an interesting format to think about. Up next we've got SZU and Below. And SZU stands for Sub-Zero U. ZU is as low as it goes by official tiering. It's basically Pokemon that don't even make the cut for PU. It's technically an unofficial format, but the list is clearly defined. But then, Sub-Zero used has Pokemon that don't even make the cut for ZU. So these are the true bottom of the barrel fellas, and below even the unofficial lowest tier. It is with a heavy heart that I must tell you that today I have discovered that Furret is a Pokemon ranked in Sub-Zero used. You couldn't even get ZU viability Furret? I thought so much better of you. Some other Pokemon that appear in Sub-Zero used include Dugong, Volbeat, Plusle, and Minun. We have Beartic in here, apparently. Squawkabilly is present. There's some real stinkers. There's some serious stinkers in Sub-Zero used. And I've heard legends that it gets even lower than Sub-Zero used. If you want to, you just look at the stats in Sub-Zero used, and there's a lower tier than that. But who would even be there? Who's that bad? There are communities outside of Smogon that also have usage-based tiers that, rather than using Smogon's terminology of OU and UU, they just have numbers. So 1U is OU, and 2U is UU, etc. And it goes all the way down to 7U and 8U, and it just keeps going down further than you could possibly imagine. I'm familiar with this largely because of Big Yellow's channel. Big Yellow delves into those depths and discovers the lowest tiers known to humanity itself. I believe in RBY7U, the best Pokemon in the game is Meowth, and Tentacool as well. Tentacool is top tier there. In Gen 1 8U, you have such heavy hitters as Psyduck and Grimer. I don't even know if anyone plays this, but those are the legal Pokemon. Some of them are, there's Mankey is legal. You can truly just keep going down. I guess at a certain point it ends and there's no more Pokemon left, but the usage-based tiering system can be extrapolated to the point of complete absurdity, can't it? Up next is Energy Ball Jellicent. This was an incident a long time ago when a player called Somalia lost a battle against the very oddly specific set, Energy Ball Jellicent. A completely random move to use on Jellicent that is not very good, but in this particular match was the exact thing that won them the battle. Maybe against a Gastrodon or something. I can't find the actual original battle, but regardless, the instigating incident was a loss to an Energy Ball Jellicent, where the presence of Energy Ball on the Jellicent was crucial to victory. What happened after this was that Somalia, a mod on Smogon and on Pokemon Online, went on an absolute tirade, spamming the chat with messages about Energy Ball Jellicent, and this is absurd, who could use this? Who would ever use this? Somalia was banning absolutely everybody who was online on Pokemon. Every single user was just getting banned in a fit of rage. Following this incident for obvious reasons, Somalia was banned from Pokemon Online, banned from Smogon, stripped of all of their titles and tournament wins and whatever else they had, badges, little things, and banished from the community. All because some random fella put Energy Ball on Jellicent. An innocent action. An innocent action. Could have been smart. They could have been ahead of their time with a tech like that. Energy Ball on Jellicent. Genius, some say. Genius. This led to an uptick in Energy Ball Jellicent usage as a result, just to really rub it into Somalia and mythologize this event. Some still remember the Energy Ball Jellicent incident. And I think that Somalia has since redeemed himself and returned back to the Smogon community. Up next on the Iceberg, IRC simulators. Before Pokemon Showdown, before Pokemon Online, Shoddy Battle, and even NetBattle, there were simulators in the chat software IRC, which, if you don't know, was, I believe, the first text-based chatting system on the internet, or at least the first one that was widely used. Now, I can't find any screenshots or footage of these IRC Pokemon simulators, but they did exist. People remember playing them. And IRC could run scripts within it that would be able to play games and stuff. It was fully text-based though, so it was primitive even compared to NetBattle and Shoddy Battle with just text that would display menus and you'd type certain commands in the chat to then switch to a Pokemon and use a move and such. But it's still impressive that even super early on, incredibly early on, they were able to simulate Pokemon battles in that way in a text-based chat room. How novel. Up next is Gen 1 Tradebacks OU. Not many people know this, but back in Gen 1, you could very interestingly actually receive a Pokemon from Gen 2. Now you could only receive a Pokemon that existed in the Gen 1 Pokedex, but you could have a Pokemon in Gold, Silver, or Crystal and trade them back to a Gen 1 game. And this would create moveset combinations that were impossible to obtain in the original Gen 1 cartridge games. Therefore, there is a competitive format called Gen 1 Tradebacks OU, where these tradeback Pokemon are allowed to be used with their new unique movesets. One of the most significant new additions was that Snorlax now has access to Lovely Kits, which you can learn in Gen 2 and then trade back to Gen 1. This is normally illegal in Gen 1 OU. As if Snorlax needed to be any better, already one of the top Pokemon of Gen 1, but now it can put you to sleep as well, which is really ridiculously strong utility. Another massively buffed Pokemon in Tradeback OU is Hypno. Hypno gained the new option Amnesia, which is an incredible boosting move, boosting your special stat by 2, used by Mewtwo. This made Hypno an actual OU threat when it previously wasn't. It also gained coverage in the form of Ice Punch and Thunder Punch, which is really fantastic. Gengar gaining elemental punches in its move pool was also significant. Ice Punch would allow it to threaten Rhydon and Exeggutor with a bit more damage. Even Persian now received Amnesia, which allowed it to potentially be a special sweeper itself, which is sort of weird, isn't it? This metagame actually changes a lot and gives a lot more Pokemon options like Amnesia and the elemental punches, which has way more impact than you would think. Gen 1 has really limited movesets, so to gain coverage options like this, and having the ability to hit like Rhydon with something, is a big deal. So it's an interesting metagame for sure, and one that changes way more than you would think. Up next is Azure Heights. Azure Heights was, I think, the first ever Pokemon database website, created all the way back in the year 2000. Not only did it catalog information like all the moves in the game and their base powers, it also had a damage calculator, which is pretty impressive for the time, I think. This website used to have a forum and an IRC chat, and I believe it's the first ever online competitive Pokemon hub. The website is still up and still has a lot of information about Gen 1 stuff, but the forum doesn't seem to be accessible anymore. And this site has not been updated since 2004. It's a real relic. Definitely something worth checking out just for curiosity's sake, if anything. Up next is Forgotten Metas. There are some Pokemon metagames that have been lost to time and are not really played anymore. I've mentioned some here that are niche and pretty unpopular, like Let's Go Pikachu, Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl, and even the pet mods, but in truth, they do have communities. While they're small, they still exist. But the Pokemon formats that get really forgotten are the transitory ones. Earlier versions of games that get replaced when the later game in the same generation comes out and updates everything. One example is the Ruby and Sapphire competitive metagame. Ruby and Sapphire, when they first released, were not able to trade with Fire Red and Leaf Green. These games hadn't come out yet, so they had an initial competitive metagame with only the 200 Pokemon present in those games, and a lack of a lot of options, like Substitute being less widely distributed. Tyranitar was not in the game yet. Pokemon like Gengar and Moltres and Zapdos were also not in the game yet. It was mostly just the Gen 3 Pokedex. And that led to some weird stuff like Sceptile being way better here, Grumpig being a meta choice because it was an answer to Regice, and other such weird things that were not the case as soon as Pokemon Emerald and then Fire Red and Leaf Green came out and updated what Gen 3 competitive actually was. There is a extremely small community for Ruby and Sapphire, I think, but I don't know how active they are these days. It's mostly a novelty that's occasionally played in friendly matches just to check it out. I don't think it's a very good metagame, to be honest. I'd far prefer regular Gen 3 OU. It's interesting, though. There is also Black and White 1 OU. Black and White 1 OU was a very different metagame, where Pokemon like Keldeo and the Therian forms and Kyurem Black did not yet exist. So that had a massive impact. This one, surprisingly, actually does have a community, though. But one format that seems completely dead with not much interest in playing it is Pokemon Diamond and Pearl OU. Diamond and Pearl were interesting because things like Bullet Punch Scizor didn't exist yet. I think Jirachi with Iron Head actually didn't exist yet. All the Pokemon available in Heart Gold and Soul Silver were not available in Diamond and Pearl Plus. There were interesting mechanical quirks, like Hypnosis had 70% accuracy in this game. It was later nerfed to 60% in Platinum. And think of how many metagames have just been completely discarded in recent memory with DLC and Pokemon Home and stuff. There is technically a distinct metagame that is pre-Pokemon Home, pre-DLC Gen 8 OU that no one really cares about playing. Same with Gen 9. With its release of DLC, there are the pre-DLC metagames and the pre-Pokemon Home metagames that no one seems to have any real interest in preserving. I can't blame them. It would be confusing to have like 4 separate Gen 9 OU metagames. But it's just interesting that while a generation is current, it shifts and its identity itself and what the format is actually changes, and older versions and iterations of it are forgotten. There are rare cases where those metagames are preserved. With older gens, it's more common because there's more intrigue with that, I think. But many are lost to time. Up next, Gen 1 Normal Discovery. In 2016, an earth-shattering discovery was made in the Gen 1 competitive scene, and this was something that went over people's heads for many years. You see, in Gen 1 there is a very unique mechanic at play where normal types are completely immune to the paralysis effect from Body Slam. This is such a specific interaction that no one really thought to discover it or find it. I mean, probably on cartridge, people just assumed that Body Slam wasn't activating because they were lucky or unlucky, depending on who was clicking Body Slam, I suppose. It wouldn't have occurred to anyone that a normal type would be immune to specifically Body Slam paralysis, but this was the case. They figured it out, they tested it, and then this was implemented on simulators, and this actually really changed the metagame. It may not sound like that big of a deal, but being immune to body slam paralysis means that, for example, Snorlax, with Reflect, can 1v1 Tauros pretty well. I mean, a Tauros clicking body slam against you has a pretty high chance to eventually paralyze, but if you're completely immune, and you're a normal type, you don't have to worry about that at all. And with Reflect, you are enhancing your defense, and now Tauros can't really beat you 1v1. Chansey would also do the same thing. Chansey with Reflect could be used as a Tauros and a Snorlax response, since without the risk of being paralyzed, and the disruption that comes with that, it was so much safer. Paralyzing Tauros with Body Slam was also a pretty common tactic back before this was discovered, because paralyzing Tauros means its speed is nerfed and it's therefore way easier to deal with. Tauros being immune to that now is huge. It means it's completely safe from something that would commonly cripple it to the point of being useless in the past. And Pokemon like Rhydon and Golem can no longer hope to land Body Slam paralysis on Tauros. This actually even led to random niche stuff rising up like Porygon, because Porygon could be used as a Snorlax wall, since it also is immune to being paralyzed by Body Slam, and it can just sit there clicking Recover against Snorlax, not worrying very much about the damage. Such a massively impactful discovery being unearthed so many years after a generation is kind of unheard of. I think this is the most significant discovery ever made years after a generation, that ended up massively impacting competitive play and really uprooting the established metagame. And the final entry on the competitive Pokemon Iceberg, tiering mishaps. This refers to tiering decisions by Smogon that were unpopular, inconsistent, or controversial in some way. A recent example that was very unpopular in the community affected by it was the incidental banning of Frostlass in Generation 4. So in Gen 4, the ability Snowcloak was banned when it was discovered that Hail teams abusing Snowcloak for its evasion could cheese victories, which is a fair thing to want to eliminate from the game. It's a rather uncompetitive concept, but unfortunately by banning the ability Snowcloak, Frostlass was illegal to use completely, since its only ability is Snowcloak. A lot of people took issue with this because Frostlass was not used solely on these cheesy evasion spam strategies. It is sometimes used not even on Hail teams. Its ability is inconsequential. It's just used as a spike setting lead with unique properties. As an Ice Ghost type, it has the cool ability to spin block while setting spikes in the lead slot. It has a good speed tier. It has Stab Icy Wind, which can help in hazard setting matchups. It even has Taunt and Stab Ghost moves. These are unique traits that make it a solid hazard setting lead. But now this option is gone, and it's purely because Snowcloak was banned. And what people would have preferred to happen was that Snowcloak in combination with Hail be banned instead. This would actually address the uncompetitive part of Frostlass while preserving the part that people believe was valuable to the format and a more valid strategy that was perfectly reasonable. Now, Smogon tends to avoid complex bans and prefers simple bans. A complex ban is the banning of a combination of multiple things, like Snowcloak plus Hail on a team. That's a complex ban, whereas just banning Snowcloak is a bit cleaner. But at the same time, when a simpler ban results in the loss of a genuine option in a format, I think that that is a case where a complex ban might be preferred and actually valid. Now, I don't think complex bans should be used all the time. One example people use a lot is Blaziken in Gen 5. Instead of banning Blaziken from Gen 5, they could ban the combination of Blaziken carrying Speed Boost. Then Blaziken could legally be used with its other ability, Blaze, which would not be overpowered, because the whole reason Blaziken is overpowered is because of Speed Boost. But I do think that that is unnecessary, because Blaziken wouldn't even be a relevant Pokemon in the format. It is outclassed completely by Infernape, who is also not even that popular in Gen 5 OU. That's adding a complex rule to preserve something that's not that valuable, whereas in the case of Frostlass, you're adding a complex rule to preserve something that is more valuable. Many take issue with how Terra was initially suspect tested in Gen 9 as well. it was not just a simple question of do we ban Terra or not. There were multiple options that were actually introduced to potentially restrict Terra. One of them was to allow Terra types to be visible on Team Preview in an open team sheet-esque system. Another was that you can only have one Pokemon that is able to terrestrialize on a team, like a Terra Captain system. So only that Pokemon is allowed to Terra, and it also telegraphs what their type is. Another option was that only Terra types of the same type as the Pokemon were allowed. Many people think that these strange attempts at restriction diluted things, and because people didn't want one of those restrictions to happen or disagreed about which of the restrictions would happen, they erred more towards the side of not banning Terra and keeping it in its default state, because the disagreement over which of those restrictions was better was kind of polluting the decision. I sort of agree with that. It was a weird choice. I mean, they were put in a difficult position, and hard to remember that back then those things were not seen as so outlandish. In fact, some of those were popular. A lot of people thought, why don't you just ban Terra on all but one Pokemon? Only one Pokemon's allowed to Terra. In retrospect, sounds a bit ridiculous though, doesn't it? A weird restriction rather than just a more straightforward ban or not ban, or maybe testing like the open team sheet. That's a restriction that might make some sense. I don't know. It was a bit strange for sure. And it may have affected the reason Terra wasn't banned, and now that is having ripple effects later, as Terra has many balance issues that have stemmed from it. So a lot of people take issue with how that was handled. Another thing in Gen 9 people take issue with is the more recent ban to sleep. You see, in Gen 9, Darkrai was unbanned after many years of being Ubers, and Darkrai was fine in OU apart from the fact that it had Hypnosis. And if Darkrai lands Hypnosis, it is really, really high impact, and it's often just going to win the game off landing Hypnosis. Now, it is risky to run Hypnosis because it's only 60 accuracy, but it doesn't change the fact that if Hypnosis lands, it's incredibly high impact. Darkrai is a fast Pokemon, it has bad dreams to chip damage things while they're asleep, and it can leverage that sleep turn for a nasty plot, which pushes it forth towards probably winning the game, or winning the game in many cases. So that was kind of unbalanced. People also cited Iron Valiant with Hypnosis as a bit of a silly option in competitive that was also really fast and high impact once it landed a Hypnosis. But what happened next was interesting. There was no denying that these things were problematic and had to be addressed in some way, but what ended up happening was they banned Sleep entirely in Gen 9 without a suspect vote or anything. It was just a policy choice that the community wasn't consulted on. Now, maybe banning Sleep was the right call, but I've always taken issue with how it was done, because I feel like a huge mechanical change like that completely uproots much of the metagame should have some community input, in the same way that Terra was a suspect vote and not a council decision. I think that Sleep should have been the same. And many people put forth the idea that maybe banning Hypnosis in particular would have solved the issue, because that was the move in particular was being used actually on fast Pokemon to get high impact sleeps and carry that to a victory. So if you ban Hypnosis, it would sort of solve the problem. I suppose then Darkrai could just use Dark Void, which has 55 accuracy, which is kind of stupid. I don't know. In a perfect world, maybe you ban fast Pokemon from having sleep moves. That's part of the balance of Sleep, I feel like, is a lot of the ones that get Spore are really slow, so that makes it balanced. Anytime a fast Pokemon gets Sleep, it's dangerous. And Sleep is a really rocky mechanic where we have the Sleep Claws in the game, of course, which is technically a mod. It's not supposed to be cartridge accurate, but I don't know. That's a whole can of worms, isn't it? I still feel as if the decision to ban Sleep was a bit hasty and perhaps should have been considered a bit more. But anyway, sometimes tier rig is also inconsistent. Currently in Gen 3, the ability Soundproof is banned from being used. I mentioned this before, but this is kind of against how Smogon policy usually works. You see, Soundproof was banned because it was really powerful in conjunction with speed passing, because you could speed pass to Mr. Mime, who would be able to prevent Roar from happening and therefore keep a speed pass chain going. Disrupt the enemy such that a powerful threat can come in and then boost sweep with Belly Drum or Swords Dance Marowak or something like that. Definitely something that had to be addressed. And banning Soundproof sort of solves the problem, because it makes Mr. Mime illegal. But if the ban-worthy thing is soundproof and that granting an immunity to roar, why then would you not also ban suction cups, which does the same thing? Suction cups prevents you from being forced out at all. So by the logic of the policy, if soundproof is broken and the thing that needs to be banned, why shouldn't suction cups also be banned, which is a better version of the same thing? Now, what's actually most powerful about soundproof on Mr. Mime is the fact that Mr. Mime has soundproof in conjunction with Baton Pass. That's the thing that really makes it broken. If there was a suction cups Pokemon with Baton Pass, that would also be broken because they would be able to keep the chain going. So in actual fact, soundproof is not the broken part, it is Mr. Mime's unique quality to abuse soundproof. Therefore, Mr. Mime should actually be banned to Ubers, because it's not soundproof that's ban-worthy. In fact, soundproof is not even broken on like Electrode or Exploud at all. It's Mr. Mime's unique ability to abuse soundproof because of its options that is ban-worthy. So I actually think by Smogon policy, Mr. Mime should be in Ubers. Weirdly. Mr. Mime should be Ubers. And in fact, I do wonder why soundproof is still banned when Speed Pass has actually since been banned itself. And the broken part of Mr. Mime's soundproof combination was the fact they could preserve speed boosts in particular and then pass them on to teammates. Speed was the fundamentally powerful part, so I don't even know why soundproof is still banned, actually. I'm not sure. I don't really care that much because I think that adherence to policy is kind of silly in the first place. In fact, a weird ban like this can result in a better outcome, even if it is weird and there's not really an argument for it. Because what this does is it preserves Mr. Mime in lower tiers. Because if Mr. Mime was banned to Ubers, you would have this weird situation where now Mr. Mime is illegal to use in its actual tier of RU, where it is ranked in Gen 3. And in Gen 3 RU, Mr. Mime is totally fine. And in fact, if it was removed from the tier, it would probably affect the whole metagame. No, Baton Pass, I believe, is banned in RU to begin with, so there's nothing wrong with Mr. Mime having soundproof, right? The only reason soundproof was a problem was in the specific metagame conditions of OU. So I think that actually banning soundproof in OU resulted in the scenario where you can preserve Mr. Mime in RU while addressing the problem of what it was doing in OU. But doesn't this raise a weird contradiction between Smogon policy consistency and the desire to preserve things in lower tiers? Because Mr. Mime would kind of be simultaneously Ubers and RU in that other world where you're more consistent with policy. I don't know. Am I even making any sense? It's all a made-up fan community, isn't it? So they can ban soundproof if they like, but in some cases well, look, we're banning Frost Slice with Snowcloak because it's policy. You can't do a complex ban. But then why did you, in this other gen? I mean, it's a different council, but I don't know, folks. I'm not sure. It's all a Kafka-esque, made-up nothing, as someone famous once stated, and that remains true. To this day, it's one of the smartest things ever said. It's one of the smartest things that's ever been said. And folks, that'll do it for the competitive Pokemon Iceberg. I hope you enjoyed it. And forgive me for having a clear bias towards singles. It's the format I've played the most and that I know more about. So I'm sure that there's a lot of double stuff that could have been included here. I tried to sprinkle a bit of double stuff in. What I do know. A whole VGC Iceberg separate from this could probably exist, made by someone who's more embedded in that community, but this one was more singles focused, because that's the community I am involved more in. So I hope that wasn't too much of a problem, and that this was still interesting to you. Let me know what you thought down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.